Good morning, everyone. Come on in, find a seat. It's awesome to see so many of you here this morning. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Glen Cathey from Ronstadt, who's here to talk about how you can find the best talent on LinkedIn. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Glen to the stage.
Thank you. All right, guys, you ready to have some fun this morning? After last night, I don't know if I can equal last night. It was a pretty good time, I'd say. LinkedIn always does a good job. So the first thing I have to open with is I want to thank LinkedIn for having me back. This is my 10th time on a LinkedIn stage, and that includes 2 times in London. And the next thing I want to say is you guys have the app, and you can give feedback in terms of taking the survey. I don't know if you guys are doing that. I highly recommend that you do, because that's part of the reason why some people keep getting asked back year after year after year. So good, bad, indifferent, neutral, just make sure you leave some kind of feedback about not just my session, but everybody's session. You can do it after the fact. So we are going to talk about how to find the best talent on LinkedIn this morning. First, you might want to know, who is this guy? Some of you may know of me. Actually, does anybody know where that photograph was taken? Yes. And how does that tie into LinkedIn? Does anybody remember? Was anybody in any of the LinkedIn Talent Connects in London? That was one of the cool outings, because again, wherever a Talent Connect is, they always have really cool outings. And we went to this location, and I got to take a picture with a fake queen. Anyway, so I know from yesterday with Matthew, I have to tell a story. So the reason why I'm literally on this stage today is just a combination of, I think, some very interesting circumstances. You know, I think a lot of it comes down to, maybe right person at right time. I started with a small staffing firm a little bit more than 20 years ago. I received very little training. I don't know if anybody in the room actually started with a really small staffing firm with like 10 to 20 people, where you hire 5 people and everybody knows that like 4 people aren't going to make it. So the people who laugh, you've been there. It's actually really good. It's like natural selection. It's like, it's you weed out the weak, or it's not right for the. So anyway, I was one of the few people that survived my hiring class, and it wasn't Ronstadt, just so you know, it was a long time ago. But without training and then sitting at desks that weren't my own, and whoever was out of the office that day was the desk that I sat at. They gave me a sheet of paper with names and phone numbers. I didn't know what they did. I didn't have their resume. So has anybody had to call people and actually not know what it was that they did? Okay. Man, it's horrible, but great in the same. I'm telling you, I learned so much so quickly. So again, why I'm here is weird set of circumstances, those things, plus we had this Lotus Notes-based database that was built from people going to technical career fairs, and you would take reams of paper, scan them with OCR, and then you could search them with Boolean. And before I started this job, I'm sure I learned Boolean at some point in elementary school or high school, but hadn't touched it since. So I wasn't like some search wizard before I started this, or like, this is how you find your candidates. They didn't teach me cold calling. They didn't teach me about referrals. It was just like, you run searches in this database, you find people, you call them. And so I did a whole bunch of things that didn't work probably in the first 3 months, and it was very frustrating, and I almost quit after 3 months, because I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure this out. They got this big whiteboard with all these performance numbers, and I'm super performance oriented, and I wanted to be number one. Wherever I go, I want to be very good at what I do. And a lot of the things that I figured out came from doing a lot of things that didn't work, and then figuring out what did work. And honestly, a lot of the core principles that I'm going to talk about today, I actually learned almost 20 years ago, the hard way, through mistakes, and then figuring out, having these epiphanous moments like, oh, wow, this is how I can find even more people in my small database that other people can't find. So I'm going to apply all these things to LinkedIn, because it has nothing to do with the source. This is all about really good critical thinking skills and research skills and just search skills. Okay. So for recruiter, right? So congratulations. You have an awesome tool, and you really do. It's fantastic. And I'm all about the data. And LinkedIn's got so much data on so many people, it's hard not to feel like a kid in a candy store and feel like, wow, I've made it. I've got LinkedIn Recruiter. I feel the same way, to be honest. And if I could have changed my deck, I would have taken this out. If anybody saw Matthew's, he basically hammered and he said, this quote sucks, don't use this as your. Now granted, the good news is this is not the theme of my whole presentation, just one slide with a quote. But now that you have access to LinkedIn Recruiter, with great power comes great responsibility. Actually, it was Voltaire who said it first, and then, of course, Uncle Ben from Spider-Man. Now, we also have to start with thinking, what are you guys trying to accomplish? You know the title of what we're trying to do is find the best people, right? We're not trying to find the hottest people. We're not trying to find candidates where we want to have a temporary relationship with, right? We're looking for the best people who are going to come into our organization, make a difference, and people that we can retain. People are going to stay around for 3 to 5 years. So it's a little bit more of a marriage, hopefully, in some cases, than a Tinder-type way of looking at profiles. So I'm curious. I'm probably going to ask you a record number of questions. I think I'm known for that. And when I ask questions, I'm hopefully making you think, which is actually the main purpose of why I like coming to events like this, is I want everybody to leave here thinking a little bit differently than before you walked in. Because if you think differently, you're going to go back and you're going to make changes in what you do, and it's going to help you do your job better and find more better candidates. So one of the first questions I'll ask is, how many search terms do you put in your average searches? Anybody who just want to throw out a number? Nobody has to go to a mic, just throw it out, I'll repeat it. You may not have ever actually thought about it before, but on an average search, how many total terms are you putting in? 6, 5, 4, 3? It can be 1, right? Guess what? They all work. I know it sounds like I have a few laughs, and I'm like, yeah, it's actually deep. All searches work. Whether you type in a title, you get good people. Whether you type in 20 terms, you get good people, right? They all work, but you have to ask yourself some fundamental questions. Do your search behaviors help you achieve your goal? Now, your goal is not Tinder-style flipping through profiles on LinkedIn. I like this one, I don't like this one. You're trying to look for the best people, okay? So you have to ask yourself, do your searches help you find the best people? Some of you may have never asked yourself that question. I did a long time ago, and that's why, again, I'm up here and happy to share all this stuff with you guys, because I learned a lot of things the hard way, and I feel like it's my opportunity to share with you things that I beat my face against the wall for months before I'm like, wow, what do some of the best people look like? What searches can I run that will help me find the best people? Not just the easiest to find, but the best people in a database, and in this case, in the largest collection of professional, profiles that you can find on the planet. And I overuse this quote. I will never get tired of it. It might be read up a eulogy or something. If you don't know how to ask the right question, you discover nothing. It's all about the questions. And again, I'm going to ask you a ton of questions today. You can answer them in your mind. Some of them you may actually leave and ponder when you're on your flight back, or back when you get back to the office. But it's all about the questions. So here's a couple of, these can be rhetorical for you guys, but these are tough questions. And I want you to be asking yourself this. Okay, you guys all have LinkedIn Recruiter. I love asking an audience like this. You guys all have the same resource, so what's your competitive advantage? Does anybody want to answer? What's that? It's you. It's how you use it, right? So some of you are actually competing for the exact same talent. So what do you do differently than the other people that are looking for the exact same talent? Okay? And another, again, epiphanous, if I'm using that word properly, a moment in my career was, wow, if it's easy for me to find, it's probably easy for everybody else to find. And that kind of bothered me, because that meant that I'm not doing anything special. I'm just finding the people that everybody finds. And that made me think, how do I find the people that no one finds? You see how the questions just keep going? It's all about discovery. And then how many profiles do you guys review? I ask this every year, and I love to ask the audiences. And I don't know if the numbers will change this year, but when you run a search, how many profiles do you typically review before you feel like you have your short list? Just anybody throw something out. Okay, we got 400 or 500. Now, who's on the lower end? 15, 30, right? The 400 or 500 is in the minority. I was actually one of those crazy people, too, that looks through 400, 500. And some of you guys are like, how do you have time to do that? There are interesting ways you can do it, and you don't have to do it in a day. We're going to talk about methodologies here where you can systematically go through 400 or 500, because if you really want to know the entire talent pool, why wouldn't you look at the entire talent pool? Why would you always stop at the first 30 or 50? And this is, again, a painful question that I want to ask. Are you ultimately doing things with LinkedIn where you are really only walking away looking at the same 5 to 10% that your competitors are, which means you're leaving 90 to 95% of the people behind? And in some cases, you really are. That's not an exaggeration. It's not just a cool thing for me to say. When you really do the math, some of you are leaving 90% of the available people on LinkedIn for the things you're looking for unlooked at. Just think about that for a second, right? I like to quote old, dead, smart people. This is another one of my favorite quotes, is I know I can't teach you anything. You know, I was a recruiter, then I became a leader, and I've run and built very large teams and trained people up from recruiters to senior leaders in talent acquisition. And you're really not teaching people things. You're just helping to make them think, which is, again, my goal for you today. So does anybody know what movie this is from? Yes, Inception's an awesome movie. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's always a benefit coming to my session. I give you book and movie recommendations at the same time. It's kind of like a Netflix, right? Recommendation. So this is a totem, right? And if it's still spinning for some of you, you guys are actually asleep. You're in the dream world. You're not in reality. I usually use Matrix analogies in this case, but I probably use them too much, even though I still love the Matrix movies. Now I'm moving on to Inception. So right now what I'm going to do is hopefully give you a kick, as what they say in the movie, is we're going to give you a little bit of a jolt. In this case, I'm not going to make you fall down, but I'm going to make you mentally maybe fall down for a little bit and wake up so that we can be aware of what is the total reality of what LinkedIn can offer you, and what is it that you, as the person going to LinkedIn like everyone else in the room can do. How do you go in and see it for what it is and get maximum results? So one of the first lessons I want to say is you should never judge a book by its cover. Okay, everybody's heard that. It's a cliche. What does that mean when it comes to LinkedIn? Remember, we're talking about the best talent on LinkedIn. So does anybody watch Game of Thrones? Some people don't. If you don't, you should, okay? And if you have, then you know you're my people. Game of Thrones is ridiculously good. But even if you haven't seen it, so we have the very tall, large, and powerful Lady Brienne, and then we have the very small and young and inexperienced Arya. But if you were to judge them just based on that alone, you might say, well, Brienne is the better fighter, right? She's huge, she's got a giant sword, she's gonna cleave that little girl in two. The reality is Arya, the younger, less experienced, but ridiculously dangerous little girl, is the one you need to be afraid of. Okay, so remember that in the next couple slides. So next we have this guy named the Hound, not particularly attractive, and actually he's done some pretty bad things in his life, but he's actually turning to be a pretty good guy, right? So the lesson I'm trying to tell you guys here is that you don't have to be good looking to be a good guy or girl. At least that's what I tell myself when I wake up every morning, right? So how does that apply to LinkedIn? Well, I'm going to tie it in and say, when you run your searches, you guys know that these profiles come up first, right? The ones that are most filled out. And again, some of you may have never really even thought about that, which we'll talk about. So you look at this profile, and wow, you can see the screenshot on the right. It's as big as a resume, right? That's your Lady Brienne, right? It's like, oh, this person's got to be good, right? It's an assumption on your part. You may not even be consciously aware of it. But that does not mean this person is better than this person. This seems like a very, very simple point, but it's, I think, lost on most people. And the other part is, how many profiles do you think look like these versus look like these? Does anybody want to take a stab at it? How many look like this? 5%, 45%? I don't know the number. I would probably say 10 to 15%. I don't know if LinkedIn will share the information, but I'll say what's really fascinating about all of it is that it's actually hard to find these profiles. Does anybody know why it's hard to find these profiles? They don't have many words, so some of the words you use, eliminate them. And plus, guess where they are in your search results? They're at the bottom, and some of you already admitted you don't get that far. So this could be the best person in that entire stack of results, but you haven't looked at them because they're the little Arya, right? Or maybe they're ugly because it's like, I can't tell what this person's doing, right? And it's not just technology. I could be looking for an accountant, and I read this profile, just this one section, and I say, I have a sense of what this lady's doing. I can feel like this person might be a good match for what I'm looking for. But if I look at this, I have no clue. I know that she's a senior accountant, she works at the same company, but I don't know what she does. And we have to be aware of the fact that it's very natural for many people to skip these because they're like, I don't have enough information, I'll go ahead and pass. I'll just contact these people because there's a higher probability, right? So be aware, what does the best look like? It may look like this, and you're gonna have to figure out how to find them, and I'll tell you that. But since we're talking about don't judge a book by its cover, has anybody ever seen this book before? Very few people? Okay, does anybody like scary movies? Wow, what is up? This audience, thank you. The Babadook is a really good scary movie, And if this book really were to show up on your doorstep, you should not bring it inside. Bad things will happen, so you do want to judge this book by its cover, and if you do bring it inside, stock up on earthworms. Now, that's an inside joke for the people who've seen Babadook. Now, some of you guys are going to go to Netflix and watch it, and I guarantee you're going to go back and be like, wow, I'm really glad Glen Cathey talked about the Babadook during this session. You guys will thank me. Unless you have nightmares after it, and then you probably won't thank me. So, again, Game of Thrones, Samuel Tarly. We want to understand things. We want to understand search. And just like Samuel Tarly, he wants to gain access to forbidden knowledge in the restricted section of the Citadel Library. We're going to go into some of the, it's not restricted, but it's an area of special knowledge. So what we're going to try to do is help you guys understand search. And many of you probably haven't just sat back ever and said, why do search results come back the way they do? And some of you are probably going to have a quick answer right now. Why does Jacqueline show up as the first result for this search for mechanical engineers here in Nashville? Just generally. Some people are talking about connections. What do you think is the biggest driver? She's got information in her profile that matches my search, right? Now, it's not just keyword frequency 100%. I've talked to LinkedIn folks. They won't share the exact combination of secret things that go into matching it, but it's still at play. And so is Jacqueline the best person out of the 574 profiles? Right now, you have to say no. Just be aware of that. You have an unconscious bias towards starting at the top, skimming off the top, and not getting to the bottom. So let's look at the bottom. Right? Here are the people at the bottom. Why are they at the bottom? Is it because they're bad candidates? No, some of them could be the best candidates. And if you're not getting to the bottom, then you're actually not even looking at them. And some of them have very small profiles. We'll again talk about why are profiles like that. And then there's this concept of dark matter that I coined years ago. It's the concept similar to dark matter out in the universe. You know, we know that it's there. We can detect it, but we can't perceive it directly. And this is an example, if you guys can see it. You know, on the left, we have a search for people that have the title of data scientist. And you're like, wow, I have 663 results in the Atlanta area. That's plenty of results, right? The reality is, if I rerun that search and I eliminate data scientist, that's why it's in red, so I've used essentially turning it into a not operator and said not data scientist. But what I've done is I've asked LinkedIn, who mentions data scientist type of terminology in their profile without saying quote unquote data scientist? And you can see, I didn't even engineer this. You see the difference, 600 some, 6,000. Now you're like, Glenn, I can't look through 6,000, and I'm not asking you to look through 6,000, but imagine if you were really looking for the top data scientists in your metro area, you could, over the course of a period of months, eventually get through all 6,000. Even though there's only 1,000 view limit, there's ways to get beyond that too, especially by using exclusions. But I just want to point out, sometimes the very search terms you put in exclude the best people because they don't say the terms that you think they should, which makes you go back and ask that critical question, right? This is a huge takeaway. A lot of times you run a search and you are unknowingly eliminating some of the best people that LinkedIn has for you. You're just asking the wrong question. You're phrasing it in a way that some of the best people just didn't happen to have the title you were looking for, or they didn't mention the skill that you were looking for. And has anybody heard of the phrase, it's better to be lucky than good? I have a few times, right? And I've always taken it at face value, but as the research geek I am, I actually looked it up, and I'm like, what does it actually really mean? And it's got some really interesting, obscure, old baseball references and stuff, and hopefully the curious people in the audience will start looking it up and be like, what does it mean? In this case, though, you actually don't want to be lucky, you want to be good. You want to be consistently good, because in recruiting, you need to get consistent results, consistent hires. You're not going to do that by being lucky all the time, right? So let's not be lucky. So let's have some kind of a methodology to how we approach our search. And I would argue, from the thousands of people that I've worked with over my career, most people don't have a methodology of how they approach a database. Because it could be your ATS, it could be Taleo, it could be LinkedIn. It doesn't matter what the source is, right? But I like bringing up this definition of haphazard because it says, look, there's, it's unsystematic, it's unmethodical, it's disorganized, it's disorderly. You may not realize that your search methods are those things, but they might be. So you have to kind of look in the mirror and say, hey, do I have a methodology behind my search, or am I just kind of running a search, looking at people, emailing people, and going? And here's the thing, you might actually be getting results that way. But imagine how many more results you could be getting in terms of people and hires if you had a methodology behind it. So we have to go to the immortal wisdom of Mama, right? So everybody knows what Mama says. Mama always said haphazard searches yield haphazard results. At least that's what she said to me. And that's true, so you have to think about that. So let's talk about some methodologies. This is something that, again, almost 2 decades ago, is something that I mentally did. It was my human algorithm. When I had a job and I talked to a hiring manager, I would first think, would everybody mention this title? And if they would, that's great. How many ways could they mention it? 2 questions. If you just stop yourself before you create your searches and ask these 2 questions, you will find more people. And it will include some people who are better than the people that your original search would have found, which is what we're trying to do, right? Would everybody have that title? Would everybody mention that skill in their profile? And it's even more important for LinkedIn, right? Because now we know some profiles don't have much text. So I will tell you that, yes, there's Hadoop developers that don't mention Hadoop in their profile. And it may not make some sense on the surface, but again, we'll get to that in a minute. 2 critical questions. You stop yourself, ask these before you run your search. You will find more people, guaranteed. Right? And here's an example of that. I can ask a very quick question and say, okay, LinkedIn, show me in Nashville people with the title of software engineer that mention Hadoop. I get 70 people. Some of you already mentioned, and it's not right or wrong, right? Some of you say, look, I'm only gonna look at 35 of them. And some of you are like, hey, it's 70, I'll look at 70. You're like, 70's enough. Here's the fun part. If you go back and rephrase that question by asking the questions from the previous slide, you're like, well, would everybody mention software engineer? And you're like, no, you could say developer, they could say programmer. There's a whole bunch of other titles too. But I just wanted to show you, if you just expand the 1 title to a 3-title search, and you take your 1 term of Hadoop into 11 Hadoop-related terms, you can more than double your results. There are some really good people that were excluded by the first search. You should care about that, so that you change your search methodology so that you can uncover some of these people. It's also how, and let's also be honest, you guys are learning, I think, some interesting things today, or actually I'm not teaching anything, I'm making you think differently, right? Some of you are gonna go back and apply this, others aren't. The ones who do will literally have a competitive advantage over others, because some are gonna say, wow, there's 70 people in Nashville. There's not. There's even more than 151. And some of the ones in the 151 that are not in the 70 are better than the ones in the 70. You guys should care about that. This isn't Tinder. You know, this isn't quickly, yeah, I found my software engineer, I win, I move on to the next job. Your goal should be to find the best candidate, and if you're always caring about the best candidate, you got to continue to be hunting and realize, who am I missing? Who am I excluding? Okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is you really have to study your results. This is something, again, very early in my career I did, and I wasn't really even aware that I was doing it until I got promoted into leadership, and then I had to train other people, and then I started to try to slow down, what is it that I do that's different than other people? One of them was that I learn from results. Some of you do too. Some of you may not think of it that way. I'm asking you to make it a part of your structured methodology, how you're very organized of how you look at results. And you might say, well, okay, so what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you a story. This is a rec that one of our clients years ago when I was with Randstad sourced right from an RPO perspective, had this position for a mechatronics engineer. I had no idea what that was. I had never seen it before, neither had the person that was working on it, and they said, Glenn, can you help me? I said, sure. I didn't actually Google mechatronics. What I did is I ran a search of the entire database. So this is what I always recommend. I don't care if you're in Nashville, New York, Atlanta. When you do this, don't look locally. Okay, so you run for the entire US. Heck, you could even search for the world. You're fishing. So you throw in mechatronics engineer, right? And then you start looking at results. You're not trying to find candidates. You're trying to learn, what do people that are mechatronics engineer, what do they say? And then on purpose, look at all the non-highlighted words and just learn, what do the people that I'm hunting for say that I didn't already think of? And so you start seeing things like robotics and embedded systems, control systems, stuff like that. And you look at another profile. And again, you're like, oh, there's a pattern. There's robotics. And then there's some interesting things like SolidWorks, right? Some things I hadn't heard of before. And you look at another profile and you get even more like some of the stuff towards the bottom, servos, control systems, industrial automation, right? These are all things that are not highlighted because I didn't ask for them. But in 3 profiles, I can take those terms, literally, and turn it into this search. which is much more inclusive than the first search and actually helps me explore the dark matter of all the people who don't say that they're a mechatronics engineer, but they really are. They just use different titles. And you don't have to be a genius to do this. Because I asked myself the question, like, wow, well, would everybody have the title of mechatronics engineer? No. Okay, so what else would they say? Just ask the database. In this case, ask LinkedIn. LinkedIn's got so much data. You can spend 5 to 10 minutes looking at profiles and then make a ridiculously powerful search that includes so many more people than your first search would have. This is very basic, but again, it's a methodology, and there's nothing haphazard about this. My goal is to find more people, of which there will always be a subset of very good people. And so when it comes to performance, right, this is something years ago, if you're looking for salespeople, but it's not just salespeople. It could be engineers. It could be anything. It could be a customer service representative or an accountant. You just have to ask yourself some of those 2 questions. So what would the best people say? Well, some people don't have anything in their profile, right? So you have to think of it this way. I have to have a complete profile strategy for the ones that are text rich, and then I also have to have a complementary strategy for the ones that are text poor. Now, this one fits in the text-rich category. Some people, when they create their LinkedIn profile, are going to say what they did, and they're going to talk about their achievements. This is not all-inclusive. This is I would say it's actually my 3rd pass, right? Where did I get these terms? I didn't sit back and think of it off the top of my head. I looked at profiles. And when I typed in 4 of these, and I was like, oh, achieved is interesting. Oh, honor or honors or a trip, right? You start thinking, you don't have to learn, you just have to learn from the results, right? So it's really interesting to put this type of an or statement in your search because it finds people that talk about achieving things. And some of the best people might be the ones that are actually saying, yeah, I'm actually proud. I was the top person, or I was the one that improved this, or I won this award, right? Or I was recognized in this way. Very powerful ways to find people, for at least the ones that say it, to find people that are saying, hey, I'm actually maybe better than some people because in my environment, I achieved more, I accomplished more, I was recognized. You might want to know them. So I don't know if anybody, it's a little early for desserts, right? But so use the dessert analogy is if you were to take one of these and you were just to eat the cream or whatever it is off the top, right, and stop there, you wouldn't really necessarily be getting to the good stuff. Now, some of you admitted that when you run your searches now, you're looking at, if there was 500, you might look at 50. You might look at 100. You're not always getting to the good stuff. And the good stuff is there. Why? Because you guys know now. Why is the stuff at the bottom? Because their profiles aren't as filled out, right? Mostly. It's not the only factor, but it's one of them. But we also now know that we can't judge people based on their profile. Some of the best candidates have the ugliest profiles. And when I mean ugly, I mean there's not much there, right? And I didn't put it in this presentation, but I usually like to talk about misspellings and things like that. I know some people are like, wow, why should I take somebody who puts 3 E's in engineer? It's not a resume. We'll talk about a few more reasons why somebody might actually not correct a typo. Don't judge them. It's an interesting little hidden talent pool. And here's another fun tidbit. There are some people that design their LinkedIn profiles to be difficult, if not impossible, to be found by you. Has that occurred to anybody in here before? It's very interesting. Does anyone here like do that? Okay, nobody wants to admit it. I know at least in IT, I know people, I've seen the profiles that standard keyword searches can't return them because they actually engineered them so they couldn't be found. Common titles are gone, even though that was their title, they changed it to something else, or they have a misspelling, and they didn't do it on accident, they did it on purpose. I've chatted with some folks in LinkedIn over the years. There's actually one company where it seems like the engineers do that more often than not. I'm not gonna say it publicly, you're just gonna have to guess. But that's fascinating, right? Why would people get on LinkedIn and try to be hard to find? You guys know why, right? You may wanna say? What's that? Yeah, they don't want to be, sprayed with in-mails every day. But if you can find them and other people can't, how many emails do you think they get? Very few. You probably have a higher probability of being one of one than one of 100. So more mind-expanding things to think about, right? So if desserts don't do it for you and you're more like a beer guy like me, don't just skim off the top, right? The good stuff is below that. right? So I'm not saying that the top results are things that you just should discard. I just want you to start thinking, okay, that's normal. Because by the way, if any of you compete for the same talent and you run the same basic keyword searches with 3 to 5 terms, you're going to not be finding the exact same people, but there's going to be tons of overlap. It's almost impossible to avoid. I know LinkedIn's actually working on figuring out how you can have more customized results. But there's still going to be some overlap because it's very difficult to get away from frequency of the search terms because it's logical. Yeah, I want to see somebody who's been a business analyst 4 times rather than somebody who says business analyst once. They may have more experience, right? So let's get to the good stuff. So I tried to find a better image than this, and I don't know if this makes me a dork for liking this, but this fascinates me. That's actually like gas density model, right? The little bubbles in the cube. This is something that's always fascinated me. Where are the best people in the search results? This actually, I think, does a pretty interesting job of showing what it could look like. They literally could be anywhere, but if you're only skimming the surface, you're eliminating and not even reviewing some of the best people, which we now know have some of the least filled out profiles, right? So does anybody work on a recurring job, like over and over and over and always looking over and over? I'm sorry. I've been there too. It's frustrating, right? But this does come down to recurring profiles. In some of your metro areas, you guys have more than 1,000 results. Does anybody ever get more than 1,000 results from your searches? Yeah? I don't know if anybody else has thought of, well, how do you get beyond 1,000? Well, you can use some of the filters, which years ago they didn't have them. So all I could do is tell you use the not operator. Now they have, LinkedIn's got so many good filters that you can just, if let's say you have 3,000 results, all you have to do is use a combination of filters that make the results mutually exclusive, and you can actually review more than 1,000 people from a search. Does that make sense? I might have some time for questions at the end. If so, you can ask. And again, I'm here for the rest of the day, so if anybody wants to approach me and pick my brain, I'm happy to do that. Hiding previously viewed. I know that LinkedIn didn't put that in just because I said it. It's a good idea, but man, years ago I said, guys, you gotta make it easy for people to say, don't show me people I've already seen. Because if I have 1,500 results and I wanna know who are the 500 I can't see, then you just make sure that you're hiding previously viewed. Some of you don't ever actually go to the advanced page, right, and look at all the options. And there are many of them, right? So you're like, hey, maybe the UI isn't the best, but guess what? I don't know how else LinkedIn can give you a ton of options other than having a page with a ton of options, right? Just make sure you pay attention, and that's one of the most powerful ones. So that over a period of a month, you literally could process 2,000 results. You know, I don't know, 50 a day. And then you can tell your hiring manager, yeah, there was 2,000 people locally, and I've actually looked at all of them. You want to be able to say that because some of the best people are the ones that you previously probably didn't review. I usually make a corny joke, a Drake reference for starting at the bottom, but sometimes you can start at the bottom because if you guys are competing for the same talent and you're all starting at the top and you're looking at some of the same people, you're not looking at all the best people, and you're also in-mailing the same people. And in-email fatigue can happen. It's just reality. So if you start from the bottom, those people don't get seen as much, and so you might have a higher response rate just by targeting the people at the bottom. And yes, on a profile where it has their title and company and nothing about them, yes, you're rolling the dice a little bit. You don't know exactly what they do, but it's not a big deal. You will find many hidden gems. I've made so many hires from so many people whose resumes I know other people would have overlooked and profiles they would have simply overlooked just because they're like, I don't feel it, I don't see it. They're people. Don't judge them by their profile alone. There's so much more than their profile. So this is something I like to call strategic exclusion. Sounds fancy. I don't know how else to describe it in a non-fancy way, but it's basically saying sometimes I have to, on purpose, exclude a term to be able to expose more good candidates. And this is a real example. I use it all the time. I don't have a better one. And the reason why I use this is because when I did it, it was my breakthrough moment to like, wow, I've discovered something. I need to do this again. So I had a role with EMC. It's a big storage company. And I needed a project manager that had experience with EMC technologies. And I had run my search, and I looked at all the people that said those terms. And I ran out of them. I bottomed them out. And I didn't find viable candidates. So then I said, well, remember my 2 questions from that one slide? Would everybody mention it? And I said, you know, some project managers, it may not occur to them to put EMC on their profile. So I'm going to have to exclude it. So then I say, well, if they don't say EMC, what things could they say that would hint that they might have the EMC experience? And I said, well, if somebody's working with data centers and they're moving them and consolidating them, they might have it. Again, this is IT. It has nothing to do with IT. It's, you see the critical thinking, the questions that I ask, you guys can have the same very methodical way of saying, if they would they say it? No. If they wouldn't, what would they say that could hint at the right experience? So when I reran this search, I actually pulled up a guy who couldn't say EMC because I excluded it. But he did talk about managing data center upgrades and site consolidations, right? He talked about data storage. I'm like, great. I have no idea if this guy has EMC. So I called him, and it turned out that he had EMC. And I like this story because when I chatted with him, he's like, why should I put that into my resume? He's like, I'm a project manager. It doesn't matter, which again was an aha moment because then you're getting into the mentality of the candidate, and some of them are not even thinking of putting the terms that you're searching for in their profile because they're thinking, why would I do that, right? It's fascinating. And I said, well, because it's EMC and they just want to know that you manage the EMC projects. Well, I've done that. And I said, well, let's put it in your resume. So we submitted it and he got the job. And you know, I hope that he stays there forever. I took this screenshot 2 weeks ago. He's still there ever since I placed him. And this is a guy that nobody could have found by typing in the required skill. You couldn't. He was dark matter. So I still think it's fascinating. And after this one time, I said, well, I got to do this more often because there's really good people that don't look like good people because they just don't say the word that I assume they would. Let's say we're looking for a financial analyst. And this approach, I'm talking about strategic exclusion, but this approach is almost like a go fish approach. Do any of you have recs that look like this, where you've got your required skills, and then sometimes you've got an equally long list of preferred skills? And sometimes it's even longer. And you're like, how can they all be preferred? I love that, though, because I will actually go ask LinkedIn. It's like go fish. Do you have the perfect candidate? Do you have somebody that mentions every last thing, even the dreams, right? But in this case, what I wanted to show you to start off is that if I just ran a search on LinkedIn, let's say we're searching in New York, for the required skills only, I would get 328 results. That's a decent result set. Most people would stop there. Okay? I get curious and say, well, what if I want to add in the other pluses, when it says CPA or MBA is preferred, leadership is preferred, financial services industry preferred, right? Those types of things. I go back and I ask another question. I search for all the basic qualifications as well as the preferred qualifications, and I'm just asking LinkedIn, do you have anyone? Sometimes the answer is no, and it's not a, well, that was a dumb question, because then you know. You have to ask. In this case, there's 4, the same location. And what I love to tell people in these sessions is that these 4 people within the other 328, but you may never have seen them, because where were they distributed in the 328? Is anybody having a moment, right? I had this back in the day. I'm like, wow, this is so easy. I'm just going to say, do you have any people that have everything? And LinkedIn's like, nah, I got 4. I'm like, I'll start with 4. Then I'll go back and I'll rephrase the question. I'm like, you know what? I don't even need to have the sensitivity analysis of pricing. So it's the same search, just put a not in front of one of the preferred skills, and guess what? I get 9 more. These 9 are mutually exclusive from the first 4. So now I've got 13, right? It's a good short list. It's nice, too, because if I actually hook any of these people, I get to tell the manager, I got somebody that has all your BQs and people that you didn't even ask for the sensitivity and pricing analysis, but I found somebody who did it, right? And you're like, well, maybe 13's not enough. And you're like, well, I'll just rephrase the question. In this case, I'll put the sensitivity or pricing back in, and then I'll get rid of the certification or the MBA, because they don't have to have it. And they're like, oh, I got 13. I'm up to 26 people. And I did it bang, bang, bang. That's copying and pasting, right? And putting a not and moving it around. And so I basically quickly found what, at least for text-heavy or complete profiles, are people that are like, yeah, I've done that. I've been in the right industry. I have the education and certification. I've done the right kind of work. And my question to you is, why wouldn't you want to cherry-pick those out of the 328? Which one helps you find the better people faster? Do you just want to get the bulk and start at the top and look at 50, where some of these people may be beyond 50 and you never uncover them? This doesn't take a lot of work. It really doesn't. Some people are like, oh, it's complex. It's really not. All you have to do is start practicing it. So, of course, when we start talking about finding the best people, we have to talk about diversity, right? And there are some things you can do with regard to your direct sourcing efforts that will help with diversity. And, of course, I won't bore you with all the details. They're actually not boring, but very exciting about why you have to have a diverse work environment, and the fact that there's many studies that show that people with diverse teams and diverse companies in general, and companies that are dedicated to diversity, literally financially outperform ones that are not, right? So if that's not enough, you should just do it anyway, because it's the right thing to do. So what can we do? I like to tell this story. I know I'm getting close on time, but I don't like to take credit for a lot of things, but this is one I'm actually proud of. It's super simple, but it was, again, an aha moment. And I said, oh, I'm going to come to LinkedIn years ago and said, what if I want to help people find women, right? Women engineers or something. What would be on a woman's profile that wouldn't be on a man's, right? And some of you may have seen this presentation before, and some of it's like, well, maybe they mentioned sorority, or maybe they mention women-only sports, or maybe it's only women-only colleges, and you're like, okay, that'll get some. But eventually it led me to, well, why can't I just search for first names? Right, so I did a whole bunch of research, and this is all available online, and I compiled a list of, I think it was like 470 of the most common first names in the US. So this doesn't give everybody, right? But you guys saw that 45 million number, right? That's 45 million in the US. And the only reason why I like to share this is because it can help you with gender diversity. It's a different way than hoping that if I post it on a women in engineering site that women will find my job and apply. This means you can go out and find them, right? But the reason why I share this story is because it was really just critical thinking. I need to find female candidates. How can I find them? What would be on their profile that I could target that would be more predictive of being a woman than a man? So I went with, I think I deduped the 100 most common female names over 6 decades, which again is all public information. It just crammed it into a big Boolean, and believe it or not, that actually works, right? And you can say, well, now I can look for female software engineers, and now thanks to insights, I can see where they're all at. Sorry, Google. Yes, I know that they're in the news for certain things, right? It's still volumetrically. They have a ton of them, right? So you can see where they work. And it actually becomes quite easy to identify these people if you have the right approach. And I don't have much time. I'll leave this for the people to try to figure out what I was doing with these. Does anybody know real quickly? The one on the left is easiest. Yes. Historically black colleges and universities. It actually works really well. It's not perfect, right? But it does work really well. Another thing is we're talking about finding the best candidates. So in addition to diversity, sometimes the best people are veterans. And again, remember distribution of results. If I get 500 results, you might want to think about, you know what, maybe I want some veterans. And out of my 500, why don't I apply the veteran filter so I can zero in on those people? Okay? I love the fact that they put that in. That's relatively recent. I don't know when they put it in. I showed people years ago how to do it manually. This is so much easier. So just click it. And then the other thing you want to understand is people. Why do people join LinkedIn? Why do people create their profiles? Some of these people are not joining LinkedIn to find a job, which means that they're not going to create profiles that look like the Lady Brienne, really long, robust profiles, right? Understand that. And again, some of the best people are not trying to be found, some on purpose, most of them just not on purpose. They're just not thinking about creating a findable profile, so you have to be aware of that. And I always like to ask this, even though we're talking about finding the best candidates, right? Finding is one thing, getting a response is the other. Why don't you have a 90% email response rate? LinkedIn's done some really good surveys and found that, literally hundreds of thousands of people have said, I'd like to hear from a recruiter about something that could be good for me. But if you're not getting a 90% response rate, we don't have time to answer the question now, why not? But does anybody else notice anything interesting about this slide? It's a pyramid with a light side and a dark side. I saw somebody else use it, I have to use that in this presentation, so I had to rebuild it. So it's kind of cool. I guess I'm a slide dork. All right. So why else is because you're approaching people with jobs. Guess what? If I'm a passive candidate, I'm not thinking I need a job. You approach me with a job, I don't even respond. You've got to approach people differently. Please do not pitch jobs at people who you know are not looking for jobs. They're not even the mentality to hear from you. So just like here in an event, imagine this, using LinkedIn for networking. Most people, they're like, yeah, Glenn, yeah. I don't know if anybody would answer honestly. I think very few people really use LinkedIn to build networks and establish relationships and maybe even get referrals from people. Like targeting people, not because they're the candidate, because you're pretty sure they know good people. And not approaching them about a job, but just being very transparent and honest and maybe a little vulnerable, as per Brene Brown yesterday. I need some help. It works. By the way, there's less than 6 degrees of separation. It's actually closer to 4. And I would say, last but not least, this is such an obvious one. I hope that some people do it, so I'm going to ask the question. Who in here actually works with your people outside of the TA organization, let's say your engineers, your employees, your hiring managers, to look through their networks, like guide them through their networks and say, can anybody raise their hands? Be proud of it. That's awesome. It's still a minority. This is a very non-intuitive, but now that I've said it, important way to use LinkedIn. Take your hiring manager, take your teams, sit next to them, go through their network, and guide them through it. Because it's one thing to say, hey, can you recommend somebody? It's another when you look through their profile, look through their past companies, look at the people they're connected to, and they'll start picking out a lot more people. And guess what? That can help you with some of the best people. Because again, the whole theme of this, which I know I shouldn't be telling you per yesterday's Pixar presentation, but I do want to kind of rub it in your face. We're trying to find the best people. And the best people can come from referrals in your own people. It's not always necessarily searching on your own. So I always like to leave a slide at the end. It's a good takeaway. You guys will get the slides, I'm sure, after the fact. But I tried to encapsulate all the lessons learned from this presentation, the key takeaways, and even I think most importantly is the key questions at the end. So when you guys leave and you go back to your office or you work from home, wherever you work, please ask yourself these questions because they will lead you down a path of discovery where I will guarantee you'll find people that you haven't found before. And some of them will be better than the ones that are easy to find today. And that's the most important thing. You're trying to consistently find the best people for your company, not just the easiest to find. That's all I got for today.